Where did it all shift? Why did the world, as it was created and the one we know now, start to look so different? Well, I can't answer all that, but can we at least have a conversation about why it's important to know that it did?
Welcome to the Sifted Wheat Podcast with Leslie Lamb, a counselor by profession, a minister of truth, and a lover of people. This is a safe place where she sets a path for others to learn how to move through hard seasons with confidence and grace, encouraging your faith, empowering your choices, and challenging your perceptions through the Word, the wisdom from years of counseling others, and her own experience of being sifted. Here's Leslie.
Once upon a time, there was one world made up of two parts, living in harmony and possible obscurity, until one day, ... I love an ellipsis, the ... that implies that there's more to come to the story, the text, or the rest of the conversation. Didn't you love it when phones added that feature? I mean, it really did our need for immediate gratification good. Unless, of course, the dots appear and disappear and no message is sent. That is just tragic. The Bible has a lot of ellipsis moments. In fact, we're currently living in one. And that one, the one that interrupts one world with two parts that I started with, we're still living in the weight of that too. Let me explain. The world was created in harmony with two worlds, a physical world, all that we can observe and experience with our five senses, and a spiritual world, which we cannot see, but Jesus taught us we can influence. And I'll get back to that. We can fall into two camps, from what I see. We can make the physical world bigger than the spiritual, which means that we will think everything is concrete and leave very little opportunity for the supernatural or the divine to bring healing and understanding to our lives. Or, in the other camp, we'll magnify the spiritual, making everything about sin and demons and neglecting the real issues of hurting and sickness that affect people on the daily. Either camp we land in its extreme, doesn't display the richness of God's wisdom or his power and his abundant love and mercy towards his creation. Instead, we're invited to walk both camps, to walk in both worlds simultaneously, to experience the fullness of life. So where is this one day that left a cliffhanger at the top of this conversation? Well, maybe you've already guessed it. And if you said in the garden with Adam and Eve, you would be correct. The story might continue like this until one day when an unsuspecting woman met a deceptive spiritual being and a choice was made. That one harmonious world suddenly took a devious and shameful turn. I'm not going to pretend to know what well-versed and studied scholars can't say with certainty, but whatever that moment meant, it was a splitting, the shifting of understanding that moved from a spiritual reality of goodness and blessing to one of malicious opportunity and embedded shame. Recently, I was sitting in Genesis 3 and the question surfaced, am I believing a lie about God's intention with this tree? In other words, just because the tree of the knowledge of good and evil brought death and destruction as was foretold, was that its original intention? Was it a celestial temptation of God to gain the love of mankind as is often touted? Or was it a separated space that would be later gifted at the right time by his hands? I don't know. But I trust the character of God is good. So to me, that actually makes more sense. Kind of like the times that I came home with a cake for dessert for my kids and I said, don't touch that cake or I will unalive you. Calm down, I wouldn't actually harm them. But don't we say things like that sometimes as a means to make sure that they don't do what we ask them to do? Now, I don't think God minces words. And what he says, he does mean. My point is not so much the threat, but more so the intention. I'm not telling my kids not to eat the cake or so much as touch it because I want them to suffer. I'm telling them that because I want us to enjoy it together. And I wonder, did God want to enjoy that moment with them at a later date, at a time where he could be the one to introduce the knowledge of good and evil? I guess we'll have to ask him to know for sure what he was thinking, and we've got plenty of time to do that in eternity. But regardless of the meaning of the backstory or the intended purpose of the tree, time and perception was splintered in that moment. Shame sent Adam and Eve into the bushes for cover, and God happened upon some scared, cake-smeared kids. The split wasn't instantaneous. Generations later, you still have engagement with the spirit world in a way that we don't fully understand. We have moments of God standing face to face with people without trembling and death. We have angels or demons making sport of the women and getting them pregnant. We even have this demonic teaching that happens about war and violence and what poisons might harm some and numb others. Really, up until Noah's day, you see this. And so it continued, generation after generation, the spirit becoming more and more hidden until we arrive in Jesus' day. 400 years of silence, and then a supernatural cry pierces the atmosphere once more. The spirit is walking among flesh, unhindered and fully engaged. God, unseen, becomes God with us. And the splintered world, for a fragment of time, comes back together to bring life and redeem the curse of the tree with a cross. But let me focus in before we get to that space, because we need to see a couple of things about living in both worlds so that we can understand our impact as sons and daughters of God. First of all, it's interesting and important to note that until Jesus, the most anyone could be was a friend of God. And that was reserved for special, selected people, heroes of the faith, we call them. But Jesus comes in and reintroduces God as he was intended to be, with us as our Father. The cool of the day had returned. And once again, God was walking among his people, this time in a robe and sandals. Romans 5 tells us that Adam's disobedience to God brought sin and judgment on all of us. But Jesus' obedience is what reconciled us to God and freed us from punishment. Not only that, but the veil was torn, meaning that what once separated man from entering into the presence of God was now permanently penetrated, a physical manifestation of a spiritual truth. In Romans 8, Paul talks about the expectation of creation for the sons or the children of God to be revealed. He goes on to say that this revealing is what frees creation from the bondage of decay and destruction, and likewise us. So this points to the idea that there's this knowing that creation is aware of that has been hidden from our understanding. There's an engagement that nature and what is created has with this spiritual world that we are not yet aware of. 2 Corinthians 3:18 points to this idea that it is the Spirit that unveils us from what we can't see, what blinds us into a deeper side of what God is doing and how we're created in his image to reflect him. All in all, in many more verses than these, is this idea that there is more than meets the eye, a world beyond what we can comprehend that is operating alongside of the physical world we do see and encounter. A world where prayers become smelt scent and incense before God, it says. A world where praise permeates through dimensions and meets the Father at his throne and joins with a chorus of creatures our eyes can't even comprehend. A world where angels minister to the hurting to bring them food and comfort. So, how do we access this world? How do we engage what we can't see or understand? Or some might even ask, should we engage this world? Well, I believe that we should. And I'll tell you why. Because if we don't, it won't keep it from existing. Our knowledge or lack of knowledge about a thing does not make it unreal. But it does open us up to deception, which can limit us in ways that we can't fully understand. Jesus even taught us how, through prayer. When he taught the disciples to pray, he included, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. This tells me that there's a petition that intercedes for what we can't see. There are times when the disciples encountered significant issues in healing and demonic warfare that Jesus told them could only be encountered through prayer and fasting. There's a story in Daniel where a need in the physical world is delayed due to forces in an unseen space holding back what is intended for the king. And it's only through his penitent and faithful prayer that obstruction is released. And these are just the tiniest examples of how the spiritual world engages us and how we need to engage it to bring resolution, healing, and support from a power beyond ourselves, beyond the physical, beyond what we can see and do. If you haven't yet listened to What's the Deal with Sifting, now would be a good time to go back and listen and hear another space where the spiritual plays out in Job's circumstances. I'm sure some are listening, and actually I hope they are, and they're saying, that's bull. Yeah, it can sound like it, huh? A world beyond this that is active and growing and seeking to bring either destruction or healing. But whether you believe it or not, it doesn't change that it impacts your life and mine. In fact, even as I share this revelation, I believe that there's an unseen frustration because there is now a question that interrupts the powers that have operated deceptively. Here's the thing. I am willing to go out on a limb because honestly, we have nothing to lose. If it doesn't exist, okay, I just took some precautions and did some things differently for no real reason. I can live with that. But if it does exist, I'm not as tempted to be the prey to an unseen God of this world who seeks to kill, steal, and destroy. Instead, I'm seeking the solace of a God of all creation as his daughter, loved and created to bring back the uninterrupted presence of God. And I'm going to take that chance. Will you? We're going to keep exploring this concept and how to live it out in our lives. We're going to dive deeper into spirituality and mental health, spirituality and identity, and spirituality and the battles we face. My prayer is that as we go, this world, this physical world, starts to take a different hue. And the unseen world of power and deception starts to stand out a little more for what it actually is and not what others have made it out to be. I have a challenge for you. What if this week, instead of just assuming your actions, thoughts, and behaviors mean nothing outside of what you can explore with your five senses, what if you considered that if there is a side of good and evil, life and death, spirit and physical, how would those choices impact them? Just a small shift to potentially impact those around you and your own life in a deeper, more eternal way. What do you have to lose? Or an even better question, what do we